Hi, it's Carly with LaunchCode. In this video, we're going to be talking about migrations. So a migration is an update to our database to reflect any changes that we've made to our models. So last video, one of the setup steps that we did to start creating these relational objects, it was to update our event class, right, to get it ready to be stored as an item or as a table within our database. We added this ID property using the constraints of the entity framework to recognize ID as a primary key in a table. Now that we have that set up, in order to actually establish the events table, we need to run a migration to tell the database to get ready for an events table, or to be able to create one. So to do that, we're going to be using those .NET EF tools that we made sure to install within our terminal or in our command line. So I'm going to open up my terminal application, and this is a brand new window. So I'm going to navigate to the project of my coding events demo application. So I'm going to, I know that what I need inside of here is a folder called LaunchCode, and inside of LaunchCode I have another folder called C#. Inside of C#, actually I don't remember. Inside of C# I want to go into something called coding events. Inside of that guy I want to go into coding events demo. So I have this, I have a coding dash events folder where I store some other testing projects related to this one, but my coding events application is called coding events demo, and that's the one that I want. So I'm going to CD and tab to get coding events. So now my current location is actually in, it's actually in this coding events solution folder. So if you remember when we first started creating applications in Visual Studio, we talked about the solution folder versus individual projects, and a solution can have multiple projects within it. For the most part, the solutions that we've been creating, though, mostly only have one project, and that project's name is the same as the solution, which is the exact case that we're in right now. So we have a coding events solution, which is where I'm sitting within my command line right now. Within that directory is both a project called coding events demo that has its own contents, and a solution file called coding events demo.sln. So I need to move into the project folder. So I'm going to say CD coding events demo. Anytime that you're running migrations, that's where you're going to want to be located, in the root of the coding events project rather than the root of the coding events solution. And if you want to verify where you are, since they do have the same name, that might get confusing within the command line. As you can see, I frequently, whenever I'm moving around, like to run the ls command to see the contents of where I'm at, my peers within my file directory, and you can verify that you're in the right spot if you're in the home directory, or if you're in the directory that houses the controllers, models, and views folders, amongst others. So that's how I can confirm that I'm in the project directory. This is where I'm going to run my .NET EF commands to run migrations. The first one that I want to run is just to establish our very first migration. So I'm going to say .NET EF migrations. Oops. And then I'm going to add one, and we're going to call it initial migration. And actually, sorry, a little bit of a diversion. When I was testing, testing this work, I'm going to turn back to Visual Studio now. I realized that I needed to, for whatever reason, my particular environment required an additional NuGet package called Microsoft.entityframeworkcore.design. Now, I'm not sure if you'll also need this, but I already have that installed, which was which was the same process as installing this Pomelo Entity Framework Core.MySQL. You might not need this one. Maybe you do as well, so maybe you need to install that first. You can always run this migration command that we're about to run, and you'll just see a simple error telling you to install it if you do need it. So you can run this, and if you get that message, then you can go back and add it and then rerun this command. If you don't get that message, then you don't need it. So anyway, so I needed it. So I am pretty sure that this migration creation will work. So I'm going to hit enter on this command. Okay. So now I see a message telling me that we're done, and I can go back into my project just to kind of see what we just did. I'm going to close this event model. To see what we just did, we have this new migrations folder within our application, and if I open it up, I see this kind of long ID string followed by the name of that migration that I just created. And let's open this up. And there's a lot going on here. You don't have to familiarize yourself with all of this. I'm certainly not 100% familiar with it all, but what I do recognize is that there is some instructions in here to create a database table, right? So we have this create table method, and it has a name of the table that needs to be created as well as the columns, and then you'll probably recognize that these columns match the properties on our event class. And then we also have this indication that the ID column is going to be used as the primary key. So it's not a bad idea to, when you're running migrations and getting familiar with them, to open these guys up so that you can kind of see what's going on. But essentially, these are the instructions to update the database. We still have to actually update the database. So we will go back into our terminal and use another .NET tool. So we're going to say .NET EF database update. And running this command, sorry, I hit enter before explaining it. So running this command is going to actually create that table. So it's going to take those instructions that we just looked at and run with them. So let's verify that by going into our database. And I have my server running as usual. And we see our schema right here. And if I open it up, maybe I should have shown you that this table wasn't populated before. But if I open it up, I do have tables now within my database. Events is to be expected. This one might come as a surprise, this EF migrations history, but let's talk about events first. So we have more scaffolding for our data. We don't actually have any events data yet, but we do have that table present. And we can also see that the columns that are inside of our new table are exactly those columns that that were laid out in the initial migration instructions. So we've now, we can now confirm that connection string that we added a couple of video lessons ago is successfully connecting to our MySQL database. This migrations history is another table. You know, depending on how much you play around with your database and changes to it, you might take advantage of this in this course, but probably not. The events is really going to be, or any of the model tables are going to be the main focus of this work, but the migrations history is important. It just basically logs any migrations that you're running in your application. So just to summarize again, the main idea here is that migrations are commands to update the database based off of any changes that you make within your application for that persistent data. So anytime you're going to be updating that event class, you will need to run a migration to have those changes reflected in the database table. So for example, if we added an event property, let's say a date, in order to have that property be reflected in the database as a column, we'd have to run another migration and update the database. So with that in mind, before we start testing this out within our running application, testing adding events and seeing those events populate this events table, we're going to make some changes to our controller, but we're going to save that for the next video.